we're gonna do intros. Fanatiq, you can go first because you're like on my corner.
Yeah. So my name is Fanatiq. I engage in a lot of political discourse, typically debates. My areas of focus are typically systemic oppression, anti-black systemic oppression, and other social issues. I've debated pretty much everybody. I've noticed a trend after debating me. A lot of times people get rocked and then they don't want to debate me anymore, as per their own comment sections or their own chat and their own videos. So I was just looking for more people to debate. As long as it's healthy, I would prefer significantly more healthy debates. I'm a musician. That's what I really do for a living. That's what I did earlier today. That's what I'll be doing later on this evening. That's what I'll be doing tomorrow. I make music. You can find all that stuff on every distributor under the name Fanatiq, Fanatiq, and you can watch any of my debates on YouTube at Ask Fanatiq, AskFanatiq.
Okay, I'm gonna mix it up a bit. Sarah, you can go if you want. Yes,
right.
Sarah. Sarah.
Oh shit, he's playing TF.
I work in the nonprofit industry, usually creating websites. I do volunteering on the side, primarily focusing on Islamic convert care.
Can you repeat that?
Oh,
Islam.
am I not clear?
No, I didn't hear the last 2 sentences. I have a hard time hearing sometimes.
Oh, I said Islamic. I volunteer on the side, focusing on care for Islamic converts.
Okay,
Right,
so
just say
Islamic convert care.
1 second.
I was like, I heard Islamic comfort care, and I was like, what is that?
Yeah, I was about to say it. I was like, yeah, I just words don't always come in my ears sometimes, and they just get jumbled around.
When you say that, do you mean people
Reason.
who convert to Islam or people who convert from Islam?
People who convert to Islam.
I would assume converts too if you're wearing a niqab.
Yeah.
I would assume it as well, but it's just, I mean, historically, like in a lot of Islamic countries, don't they, like, isn't it punishable by death to convert from Islam?
That's not strictly if you convert from Islam, and I do recognize that there are societal issues that occur when one leaves the faith. However, they're also in the same state. There's also several issues affecting Muslims nowadays that it's hit converts especially hard. For example, I know a couple of women who hide their faith because they're scared of being kicked out of their family or murdered.
Yeah.
Okay, that's
And
enough.
those people deserve support just as much as those who are leaving.
It depends on where you live. Like, some countries are cool, some countries aren't. It's just I
would need to see some of that, but that's a conversation for another day, though, for sure. I would like to see some data.
I'm fascinated by that.
I mean, I assume that if you live under... Oh, sorry, Sarah. Oh, no, it's feedback. Okay. I assume that if you live like in America, some parts of the country might not appreciate like a daughter like converting to Islam. Like that seems highly plausible to me.
No, it's
I'm
guaranteed.
just gonna run with that.
It's guaranteed. And pretty much any Christian faith, like, to convert to Islam would be considered like in some sort of way an apostasy or something like that. I've yet to hear like of people wanting to kill people because they converted to Islam or something like that, or any sort of like cultural normalization of that type of thing. But to the contrary, I mean, like, literally within like several countries, like, the laws state that converting people to Christianity and things like that from their faiths would do that, and they just actually outlawed it even in Israel as well. Converting people to Christianity is worthy of death.
Well, I would just be curious, Sarah, which country do you live in, if I can ask? If not, it's fine.
America.
Cool. So
the specifics are that I know someone who actually faced death threats at only 17.
Yeah.
It was really unfortunate.
Oh yeah, sure. I would imagine.
That's a word for it.
Yeah, it's probably just a lesser talked about thing, but Muslims get a lot of shit in America, so.
Well, can I ask you, what exactly do you do? I don't know what that like entails.
So I help run several online events, social, educational. We do have some job training one of the organizations I volunteer with offers job training. at a discounted rate for specifically converts. So I believe that class focusing specifically on IT, so those stuck in negative living situations can work their way up to a better wage, since we know how America treats the working class. Cough.
Sure.
Sarah is also based as fuck. So there's that too. I guess for people who comes from a more secular mindset, don't really think about how problematic it would be, like if you are like a person of faith in a more like traditional way, especially like Islam or like Judaism, and you like convert between religion, and how there might be like room for social like worker type help in that situation, because it's such like a difficult social transition, especially in a more secular society, because like a hyper individualistic society would go like, yeah, you just like convert, what's the big deal? Sorry, Zara, you want to say something?
Yeah, no, I feel like it's not even like necessarily like a secular society. The United States is in most ways like clearly like influenced by Christian supremacy. So if you look at what most churches do, they provide communities to people, they help people out in their community. So it would only make sense, I don't know, of speaking outside of my range as like a secular person. But seriously, like I've seen so many Christian churches do similar care work for new converts and new believers, where they're helping people find new people to socialize with. They're helping them adjust. They're giving them community and support. They're giving them education. They're offering to help them improve themselves materially with like job training or promotions or like networking connections. Like most churches and organized religions do this kind of stuff. So it shouldn't be any surprise that, you know, any one religion participates in helping out their members, specifically new members, and especially in conditions where, you know, there is a lot of prejudice and bias against people of, you know, like the Muslim faith anyway, at least in the United States.
I obviously, like in terms of the organized religion, I meant that like obviously this is utopia far away, like not America stuff, but like it's interesting, like if there were part of like social work, if social work was like better or like better funded and had better resources to also like help converts in that situation, or other people who are, you know, like imagine if you can go to a social worker and be like, I just convert to Islam, or like I just came out as gay, like help me with finding community, help me with like protecting myself from family members who might not be okay with it, or stuff like that, you know. That would be, I don't know how prevalent that is today.
Okay, but just to be clear, like to put it into context, like my reason for framing the question the way I did, in Iran, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Brunei, Mauritania, and Saudi Arabia, like if you leave the Islamic faith, it is a literal crime within their laws that is punishable by death. And so like while I understand, like, yes, you're probably likely to receive some sort of like social ostracization for like leaving the faith of like Christianity and things like that, any kind of apostasy, you feel like, oh man, this is dangerous. Obviously, if you truly believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and that you know, he's the only way to get to God, then yeah, you would imagine that a person is like risking eternal damnation by leaving your faith. I could totally understand where the mentality comes from, but I think also Christianity has like embedded within it and you know, the injunction to do no harm. So then that's why we don't have any laws like that would like punish apostasy you know, with death, like in literally any Christian majority countries, period. This is not like the marriage of the codification of laws to enforce death penalties seems to only exist one way to the other, which is why I was like framing it in that way. Again, not denying
That's
in
not
any
completely
capacity.
accurate.
Not denying in any capacity. I'm hoping that you'll have some sort of example and not just say that it's not accurate. Not denying in any capacity the fact that, yes, you are likely to be ostracized by leaving like the Christian faith, that it would most likely be socially awkward, considering people genuinely feel like, man, like you're leaving everything I raised you, like so on and so forth. All of that stuff. The ostracization is likely. I just don't see a one-to-one comparison when you start talking about literal punishing, state-enforced death penalties on people for leaving that one religion to the other.
Sarah, do you want to respond to that? Or if not, Zara might want to go, or I might want to go.
I'm not prepared for the specific conversation. I hope you can respect that, as I did not anticipate that debate topic coming in.
100%.
Absolutely.
Totally fair.
I think that's fair. Fanatiq, I do have a question. I found that was interesting because I know you're a Christian, correct?
Yes. Yes.
So I guess I was maybe unfairly surprised when Zara talked about how America is like a Christian supremacist country, and you seem to nod in agreement, and I guess I was caught off guard. Can you tell me a little bit about that? I guess I didn't expect it.
Oh, sure. I mean, there's no denying it. You just got to be honest with yourself. When George Bush can hold up the Bible and say that this is what told me to go to war, or I prayed and God told me to go to war and stuff like that. Or when you see the evangelicals, really supporting Donald Trump because he converted to Christianity, or Donald Trump tear gassing all of those people in order to get to a photo op so that he could hold a Bible upside down in front of a particular church. So when you see all those kinds of things, there's no denying, for any person who's honest with themselves, that this country has a lot of ties to religion. Even though I understand that there will be a separation in church and state, that doesn't immediately mean that the average person isn't religious. The average person in this country is Christian. The average person has religious beliefs and believe in the Christian faith. So then if that's the case, then it makes all of the sense in the world that people are going to probably try their best to legislate from something that derivates from Christian principles, right? You got to remember, it was quite a while ago, but not too long ago, where there were sodomy laws that prevented sodomy specifically because of religious injunctions and things like that. So I think the idea is yes, we obviously believe in Christian supremacy. I don't take issue with the words Christian supremacy, because what that basically translates to me, unless they meant it in a different way, would be the understanding or belief. He, her. Sorry. She.
No, she, her. There's no they, them.
Oh, I got you. Well, I didn't. Yeah, I got you. Whatever. The thing that would have made the distinction is if they were signifying. I'm saying they because of the general argument. I don't even remember who it specifically came from. But where if the argument was basically that there was a negative form of supremacy, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. It's this. Belief in Christianity is the belief that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and that he is the only way to come to God. So then if that's the case, then that means literally every other religion is either false or not able to be substantiated, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So then if that's the case, then yes, you're obviously going to be a supremacist in that regard, right? You genuinely believe your faith is the one true faith. So if that's what they're implying, I totally agree that there's no way around that. It's literally embedded within the religion to be supremacist in that regard, if that makes sense. Sorry, that was a little wordy.
No,
well,
that's good.
Speaking of things like the freedom of religion, the secularization of American and Western politics is the reason that you no longer see the extraordinarily strong laws that would be similar to the ones that you're citing and claiming are only exclusively in these countries. That's what I was pointing out. The fact that we've had people killed over religion. We've had hundreds of years of crusades where Christians were literally killing people for not being Christian. So the idea that it only exists in one place and time in the world.
No, that's
where
not, that's a
leaving a religion or converting to a religion is pretty like unhelpful, considering like we had like a forced conversion in the Anglican Church historically very recently. We've had all sorts of like issues of, like people who deviated religiously being persecuted potentially to the death. If you look at like the strength at which, like some of the like Quaker religions or the Amish or Mennonite religions like shun, and like it's pacifist, it may not be death, but like keep in mind that these are religious concepts that are, traceable throughout most of like humankind and culture, where people establish particular communities and then decide that people who no longer wish to participate in those communities should not continue being a part of the community. And I'm not voicing like one way or the other whether I have like total agreement, but I just feel like it's unnecessary to make such like a harsh characterization intentionally to like set up a framing for Islam as a religion for like some sort of like weird like off-topic gotcha.
No,
like I don't really think that's what we're here to talk about today.
I'm not doing a gotcha. It was a genuine question. If I was doing a gotcha, I'm doing a gotcha. I'm an extremely aggressive person when I want to make the points that I'm trying to make. You never have to worry about me being passive. That doesn't go. That's not part of my character. So then, if you know that, then to imply that that was some sort of weird gotcha that I was trying to do that wasn't obviously apparent, then that means you should know better. Because obviously, if I was trying to do a gotcha, I'm doing a gotcha. Like right now, where I'm being aggressive or I'm responding pretty seriously. Hold on. Don't interrupt me, because I didn't interrupt you. Where I'm responding very seriously and very directly. When that happens, you understand that it's happening. You never have to guess with me. Lastly, what I'm talking about when I'm saying what you did was extremely reductive. When you start making implications like, there's ostracization and things like that within other religions. I've never denied that in any capacity. In fact, I already ceded that very, very readily. Yes, you are likely to find ostracization within other religions and within Christian faith, where if you like abandon like that faith and that community, that you're likely to receive ostracization. What I created was a very clear distinction from that ostracization by talking about literally codified laws that allow and cause people to be put to death for apostasy. Those things are very, very different. I think that framing is very specific and very unique. I asked you if you had any examples of Christian faith doing the same thing, and you didn't have any. So then at that point, it sounds like this is realistically one-sided in that regard. And furthermore, lastly, hold on, wait. Okay, I got you. You're gonna give those two when I'm done talking. I didn't interrupt anybody. Let me finish, please. So then lastly, the other thing that I wanted to talk about, if you want to point out like things like the Crusades and things like that, I will grant you those Crusades were wholly evil and disgusting. I don't stand by anything that the Catholic Church did. But I would also like to point out, I'm not a Catholic. I would also like to point out, by the way, that what the Catholic Church did within those Crusades and things like that were things that they had already done prior to their accepting and adopting of the Christian faith. You have to remember how big the British Empire was, and that the fact that the Romans themselves persecuted Christianity during its burgeoning stages. The Colosseums were literally built with Christians being put to death caged within lions and things like that. The catacombs literally specifically, hold on, let me finish this point. I'm almost done. The catacombs literally existed where Christians had to live separately and were fleeing in order to avoid those things. So the Roman Catholic Church does what what Romans do. And so they just use the faith as an excuse to continue doing their same barbaric expansion. So to try to paint that as something that's Christian when it's literally anathema and completely contrary to the laws or to the fundamentals found within the book itself sounds a little bit ridiculous. It sounds like these two things are not fair, not equal.
Okay. Blah, 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 blah. This is not the topic. You talked a lot, however, Fanatiq. So Zara and Sarah and everyone else, if you want to respond or engage with us, we can. I personally would like to move on, but whatever you guys want to do. We're not even finished the intros. Nina didn't get to.
Yeah, so I just want to move on. This is a whole entire different conversation.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
If you want, I can talk about my experiences a little bit in DMs Fanatiq after this is over, or if you want some time to prepare, which I would personally prefer that. As I stated earlier,
Sure, totally fair.
Impulsive debates aren't the best. I think you can agree.
Yep.
Zara, if you want to respond, you can. Otherwise, we'll just move on.
Yeah. My point is that this isn't on topic, and there's no need to like take all this time to establish some sort of framing. Let's just move on.
Scratch a liberal and a fascist bleed. What does this phrase mean to you? And after, I'm not going to go like individually everyone. I'm just going to kind of open this right away if everyone's okay with it, unless someone made like a prepared statement or something. And I just want to have like a more free form, unless everyone's okay with like keeping the initial statement short, and then we open it up. Like, I guess you guys can like decide what you're more comfortable with.
Whatever allows me to go on a waffle about the 2-day Google spree I tried to go to find the origin of that stupid quote.
It's just one of those quotes probably that are just lost to time and its origin.
Well, I guess maybe I can say what I interpret it as, and then we can, work on that.
Sure. I just like to say that it's probably more like a saying than a quote. Like quote implies a very like direct origin and like.
Like Lannisters always pay their debts.
Nina, you can start us off.
What I feel when we say, you said when you scratch a liberal and a fascist, please, that's the quote, right?
Well, I wanted to say cut a liberal, but I was like, I don't know, TOS.
Sure. Yeah. Gotcha. I mean,
I think scratch
I interpreted that as like liberal tendencies of being very passive and like civility politics bullshit means that like you're just kind of complacent in things that will let the rise of fascism happen. If you're going to be a liberal where you're just kind of like a very passive entity where deep down really what you're doing is just enabling fascism.
Does anyone else want to weigh in? If not, I will. So I just like it.
Weigh in on the statement?
Whatever you want to
say.
say.
I mean, to you, like, do you disagree with what I said? Do you what do you think?
Well, I think the better. I don't really like the statement as a whole because it gets too easy to misuse. So I'm more interested in the conversation around different tendencies that liberals may demonstrate that like have some overlap and give cues for fascists to occur. Like fascists don't come out of nowhere; they come out of specific contexts that allow them to occur. So I would like point towards like if we're looking at the general liberals, not like Democrat liberals, but like the philosophical sense, right? Then what you're going to look at is the nationalist tendencies. You're going to look at the usual statist support that a lot of fascists use as a core weaponizing of their ideology, or different structures of power that occur that fascists latch onto and use in a way to cement their position.
See, that's interesting that you said that, because actually my response was going to be that, like, you said about how maybe it's easy to misuse it. I guess for me, the way I engage with, like, the reason why I actually say it a lot, especially, like, we all know Wick. So that's something I would talk to Wick about. Because it feels like in the political space that I engage in, it feels like liberals do like a bit like liberals who aren't enabling fascists seem to be in hard to find these days in the political spaces that I occupy, I guess is what I'm saying.
The thing about it is liberal, like, you're never going to be able to use this complete framework towards liberals because
of course,
complicated. Because like you're going to have I would say is if you're going to see these issues occur more often, you'd be more likely to see like the greater humanity if you engage with people in real life. So like I have different people I deal with in Food Not Bombs that are really friendly and really kind and really care about like queer issues or homelessness issues. Like they care about these things, but they're still on some sense still stuck within the framework of the system has to exist as it is, and these things are more aberrant than like natural culminations. So that is where the issue arises more than anything. But if you're just going in Twitter online space, you're going to deal with Wik or insert talking head dialogue tree, whatever.
Yeah, that's fair, I think. Zara?
So I think like on the surface, pun intended, the scratch a liberal and a fascist bleed is both like a observable reaction, but also, like a figurative idea that underneath every liberal, there is so much that they agree with fascists about, or that they would make and cede ground to fascism on, or that they even to the point of, like appeasing would sacrifice their own personal position to find a midpoint or move towards fascism in order to, like speak to that piece, or like to preserve that negative piece, which is more of that kind of like presence of injustice sort of thing. So like fascism on its own is a defense mechanism of liberal democracy under capitalism. Whenever the threat comes to capitalism, fascism is ready to, respond to defend it. And I think it's pretty easy to see other situations in which someone whose primary ideology revolves around private property as the fundamental, like point of which all freedom exists, is not going to see, how to combat or even actually to oppose fascism when it does arrive. So, like when you upset a liberal, when a liberal feels like they've been wronged or harmed, they're going to be susceptible and responsive to fascism. That's that hyper nationalistic like sort of vibe that they can connect with. There's nothing in their ideology that is opposed to it. So lastly, I do want to point out that like this has happened in other cases with similar kinds of problems. If you look at like the letter from Birmingham jail, when Martin Luther King talks about like the greatest hindrance to Black folks in the United States being white moderates and not the extremists, because they are the ones that are most likely to continue that harm in a large number of people.
Yeah, I agree with your goal, but not with your means, because they'll always default to like fascist sensibilities rather than like going with what they have the power to execute, like justice.
Especially considering fascism is a very particular type of threat to, people. And that threat can't just be voted out, and it can't just be, like picketed. Like there are very few reasonable solutions for fascism, and liberalism is against the optics of all of those.
I do want to provide a small critique in the way you're conveying is specifically it's towards not directly opposed. The problem that comes is more often than not there's kind of a cognitive dissonance that occurs. So where they may, like a person who believes in like America, right, may believe that they oppose fascism. They're like, yeah, I don't want these horrible entities. I believe in democracy, I believe in freedom, or I believe in the ability to have these rights, right? Like those, they have those genuine beliefs, but they also have the genuine belief that these systems come out of, say, like the statist modality, because at the end of the day, private property comes from the state. So it's more of the cognitive dissonance, and how in that cognitive dissonance it allows for fascists to prey on the worst tendencies present.
Can someone define fascist for me?
I would say basically like a hyper-nationalist statist ideology. So basically like the whole premise of it is to build an entire nation, build an entire community around the nation state, using it as the main tool of pushing that.
So then pretty much every totalitarian government would also be fascist?
You can make the argument of like totalitarian versus fascist, but there's a lot of overlap.
Yeah, I mean, it's more of an
I
authoritarian
literally.
thing.
Sorry, Nina.
Okay.
I just want to quickly, like, someone pointed out in my chat right now, like, we're just having this discussion. Like, they said they were like talking about the definition of fascism, and someone asked them, okay, so you don't think like white nationalism or extreme nationalism is on the rise? And they're like, well, even if it is, that's not fascism. So I responded as like, well, they're almost like, I even if I were to say that's not like fascism, which I'd be uncomfortable doing, like they're almost always like interlinked, and I'd like to hear examples where like extreme nationalism wasn't performed in a fascistic manner. So that would be kind of like
Okay.
my
So
approach to it.
here's the problem that people sometimes have in connecting like movements to ideological trends, right? For example, a lot of white nationalists today operate in a much more decentralized and somewhat localized manner. Like you'll see bits and pieces like Patriot Front operating, and what they do is interact and they act in different parts. But what you need to look at is the general outcome that they profess, right? Like Patriot Front is like hyper Christian, hyper nationalist, blah 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 blah, right? And what it does is they're ultimately pushing for control of the state in order to push their goals. But on its face, it's not going to look like that because of the way they operate.
I just. Sorry, Zara, very quickly. I said that in response to like how, yes, I bet you can construct a narrative where an authoritarian government isn't fascistic, but like I would kind of challenge you to do that, and then we can argue about it. That was more like, sorry, Zara, you can go.
No, I was going to say, like, anytime you're talking about like palingenetic ultranationalism, you're dealing with like a very specific kind of movement. Like you could base it off of a general understanding of, like the like fascism and like the guide points, but that's mostly like kind of like a looking back sort of idea. It is not that fascism is always authoritarian or totalitarian, because you could say the same thing about monarchies that have existed in the past without being fascist.
Wait. I just want a little bit of clarification. Not all fascists are authoritarian or totalitarian. Did I hear that right?
No, not all authoritarian or totalitarian.
Okay. I had it the other way around. Sorry.
Right. And so like it really is unhelpful to point and just, like try to draw it to like, oh, well, this is authoritarian, therefore it's fascist. Like it's like that's an unhelpful kind of thing. So it's important to like distinguish that like they are not hand in hand.
Okay. Sure, maybe it might be more helpful to talk. I'm sorry, go ahead. I don't know if you got your Fanatiq got his
No, you're good. I can go after.
Okay. I maybe like the opposition could be better to understand like they're opposed to like anarchy, democracy, pluralism, liberalism, socialism, and Marxism. So, I mean, I feel like that might be a better way of understanding what we're talking about when we're talking about fascism.
Exactly.
In that context, of course.
I think that's exactly the point. Is what I was going to point out is that you can't. As has already been clarified, you can't just say nationalism is fascism, because nationalism is nationalism. Fascism is typically nationalistic. It's a more extreme version of nationalism, but that's like right. And same thing with authoritarianism. A monarchy is indeed authoritarian, but is not necessarily fascistic, right? But all fascists are authoritarian. I think what also has to be there is. I remember it was specifically like the intentional suppression of, I guess we talked about media, but it's not just, it doesn't have to be a suppression of media, but suppression of any type of voice that can dissent or take away power from the authoritarian figure. Furthermore, then there would have to be, the suppression and removal of individual freedoms. right? Which I guess is part of baked into the idea of like extreme nationalism. So I think those things are what become fascist. And I would say, I remember having this conversation on a Prime panel quite a while ago, that I do believe that the left, if left to their own devices, can become particularly fascistic in a sense of like suppressing any people that want to say anything, like having chilling effects and removing conversations so that people aren't able to even voice opposition to whatever their ideology is. They can become totalitarian in certain ways. We've seen it already. So I don't think liberals are fascistic per se, but I definitely think you can find fascist similarities on the left.
Well,
I would want to push back immediately that the left has never had power to the point that there could be totalitarianism, and it is like really easy to say that like.
Okay. I'm just going to pop in here before we start anything. This is going down a hyper nuanced conversation about the tendencies within different leftist ideologies that are prey to fascistic or nationalist tendencies, right? Like, for example, I as an anarchist would say socialists have done a lot of bad shit, but basically because of how they operate and the tendencies they are don't like really reckon through, like a lot of socialists who claim thinks of things like revolutionary nationalism, which in turn creates the conditions for these hyper totalitarian or fascistic states. And what I would say the argument is that left is not perfect in any capacity, but what I would point to is the more common trend and the more common issue of the right, and how you see like fascism pretty much rises out and there's not really an argument for horseshoe theory. It's instead of like just tendencies that exist and which are easier to prey upon.
Fascism is always a right-wing ideology.
Okay, but when you start engaging in these concepts of just like looking at, say, like for example, you look at different socialist movements that existed in different nation states, and what happens is major political leaders gain power, and from there they use these socialist parties or these socialist groups and drive their own ends. Like we've looked in different countries in the Middle East or in Russia or in China, how they take these because I would basically point to is the tendency of hierarchical models, and that's the issue a lot of socialists have dealt with. But I would still point again to the greater tendency of just overt hierarchies within fascistic models.
I'm gonna say something. So there are two conversations that can happen, and I felt like a dissonance earlier, so I just want to clarify that. There's a hyper nuanced, very specific conversation that can be had with, and we're all capable of it, and that's probably what we are trying to engage with right now, which is like very specific definitions of things and like the very specific ways of like nationalism isn't fascism, but all fascism has a national component and stuff like that. What I was talking about earlier is more about like from because fascism has the element of being a more slippery type of ideology that is a lot more snaky on its root level. We don't actually, things grow into dominating fascism. So someone can be like have fascistic tendencies, but for a country to be fascist, like there's going to be needing a lot of like processes that led to that direction. And sometimes we can't even recognize fascism for fascism. What we do, we recognize components of fascism and we're saying red flag. That is how we start listening out for fascism. So that was like what I was saying earlier when I was talking about, yes, when someone is like nationalist or like extremely nationalist, I open my ear, like my ears are listening harder for more fascistic rhetoric, which usually comes with it. So what I was meaning that like when you have fascistic ideas, they are often like intertwined. So I get that we're having a different conversation about like the specific fascistic elements. I just wanted to say that I think it's a bit optically destructive to do that. I think it's like, it's almost like a liberal tendency to be like, well, this is a core component of fascism, but this is it's not fascism. And it's true that it's technically not fascism, but put enough components of fascism together and you get something very fascist adjacent or fascist, right? So it's interesting how that works. Fanatiq, you look very unhappy.
Are you guys familiar with the 14 points of fascism, just to like, so we're all on the same page?
Okay. Here's while Umberto echoes as a common political talking point, I would say use it as a guideline, a grain of salt, and it isn't a perfect measure because it was made in the fucking like 40s. So like it's probably better to look at more modern analysis in order to get a more holistic view.
Okay.
I mean, I think
No. Hold on. Don't see that. Like I would say, like, if this I'm just saying, like, well, because like obviously, like, yes, like words evolve and like they change and things like that. But explain to me what would be problematic about that previous analysis. First off, it's not that I want to get bogged down in definitions. Like, that's not my goal. The idea is I've had too many conversations with people talking about fascism or communism when they literally can't even define it. They have no idea what they're talking about. The word fascist became like just a punchline for pretty much all people on the left for like over the last decade, I would say. The latter end of the decade. But either way, you'll hear, like, no matter what, anything I disagree with, anything that's a problem for me is fascist. And so it's like, yeah, at this point, when we get into these conversations, if we're going to be using these often misinterpreted and misunderstood words, I do want us to at least have a basis so that we are actually talking to each other and not past each other.
Sure. I was getting a little frustrated, but that's fair. Well, I mean, usually there's a lot of like usually 14 points of fascism that is like generally known, and like again, like if you're talking about fascism, 40s is the time to know it. Like you're talking about when the Nazis were coming to power. It's important that our understanding is the same understanding that we had during the 40s. I think that often we think that history has ended. We're never gonna have another fucking like Holocaust. Like, and that's not the truth, right? So understanding what fascism looked like before it like went to its like complete apex, or even when it was at its complete apex, is incredibly important. And when did that happen? In the 40s. So that's important to know. So if you want to know what the 14 points of fascism is, I'll be quick with this. A chatter was very kind to list them off. They obviously have more explanations, but I just think that if we're going to try and figure out like our definitions, why don't I just go ahead and list them off here about what generally the 14 points of fascism is, okay? So powerful and continuing nationalism, so we have mentioned that, of course. Obviously not one of these means the rest, but it's all of them combined, right? Disdain for recognition of human rights, so generally like not having any respect for human rights. Identification of enemies, scapegoating as a unifying cause, so like if you're wondering about like immigrants or whatever. Supremacy of the military, of course. Rampant sexism, of course. Controlled mass media, so not having any free speech, having complete control over the media. Obsessed with national security. Religion and government are intertwined. Corporate power is protected, of course. Labor power is suppressed because they don't want the people having power. Disdain for intellectual and arts. This is actually a huge part of like how you can tell somebody's fascistic if they're again, disdain for art. Obsession with crime and punishment. Rampant cronyism and corruption, and fraudulent elections. So those are the 14 points that are, they've been reworded in different ways, of course, but generally those are the 14 points that you always see in like fascistic countries, and because of the idea.
I want to squeeze in before you guys like go at it again. Okay. I think that because again, like I went about the rant about how fascism as an ideology that develops has very like slippery tendencies, and it's very covert at the beginning. There is a utility in the education of like the public having potentially more reductive or less less super nuanced, like hyper-specific research on sociology opinions in terms of their understanding of how they can spot red flags for fascism versus like a hyper super like level educational like format, right? And it's fine to have both of those conversations. And so I'm saying that to say that, like, when people say, oh, the 14 points, well, it doesn't make the full thing, or here's a better definition, I think we use rule of thumbs even when we teach children. You know, there's always like a simplified explanation and a more adult explanation for things. And I don't think that's necessarily bad, because not every person on the street can spot fascism if the explanation for what fascism is like 30 pages of like a sociology research long type of thing, you know? So I just wanted to make them point. You guys can.
I was just wanting to clarify myself first. When I said fascism in terms of like socialist tendencies, I was meaning authoritarian tendencies. Basically, these types of tendencies in these like revolutionary nationalism or these concepts makes it easier for fascists to prey onto, and in the same way that liberals in some ways could be like more intense than liberals may demonstrate. So that's what I was primarily referring to.
I just wanted to touch on a couple quick things. I'll try to be like super quick about it. So when I say that, like, you know, we can always refer to fascism, but I was saying that, like, kind of need more modern interpretations and understandings in addition to understanding the history of the past, in addition to understanding the, you know, like, first really well-researched and recorded rise of fascism. Those things are important, but the way that fascism evolves and sets itself specifically as unique to the place and time in which it has arisen is kind of worth noting, because like if you're looking for a checklist, you'll never get one, it'll be too late. But it's important to understand those things and then look at a modernized kind of like perspective. The second thing is fascists always lie. They constantly lie. That is a major, massive, important thing that they do. That's how they recruit. That's how they stay slippery. That's how they give themselves the benefit of the doubt. And 100% of the time, liberalism will fight to preserve a fascist right to lie, recruit, and do propaganda before they will ever take any means to stop them from doing that recruitment and propaganda until it's too late, until they have power.
And that would always be under the excuse of, well, it's one element of fascism and it's a red flag for fascism that might breed fascism, but it's not fascism, so it's okay to leave it unchecked.
Can I ask a follow-up to that? Like, are you saying that, like, using that maybe, like, liberal people should not, or should curtail free speech? Because I guess I was a little bit confused on your point there. Like, using that I agree with the idea of, like, yeah, it's not like a checklist and then you know, it's a slow over time thing, of course. But, like, what exactly did you mean that with your ending statement?
With the ending statement, I mean that like a liberal concept of free speech should not include the right for fascists to have a platform to speak propaganda or tell lies. So, like,
you mean legally?
Maybe not legally, in that I'm not asking the government to come in and step in and use the, you know, like, violence of the state to stop people that they consider fascists. However, specifically in conversations or the idea of the, like, marketplace of ideas, liberals have a track record of fighting to make sure that fascist voices are continually heard and that fascists speaking with their opposition.
You're talking about like an Elon Musk thing, right?
Correct. Like, and so, like, that idea is not helpful. And so I'm not speaking about states, I'm speaking about people and systems.
Wait, okay, what ends up being the alternative, though? Because, like, it's not that liberals are specifically fighting for the right for fascists to speak their rhetoric. Liberals are fighting for the right for freedom of individuals, period. And so then if a fascist individual into absorbing some of those rights and using those rights to their own benefit, like that happens. But that's not. I don't know what the alternative would be other than to deny those free rights. Because if the freedom isn't freedom for all, then are we truly free? Because then at that point, then if the state is going to be making a decision on what type of freedom we're going to be deciding, then at this point, now we're getting to that point where if a state decides the only things that are free are the things that align with me, my nationalistic ideas, etc., then that's also akin to a form of suppression of your opposition, which can become fascistic in and of itself too.
Can you remind me where I said the state?
Wait, yeah, okay, so...
I'm sorry, where else are these things being enforced in the United States?
Okay, so this, I
She
feel like...
specifically said not the state.
Right, but I
like
get you're saying that, but then my question becomes, if we're going to be saying not the state, who else is going to be enforcing these ideas? When you mention the word rights...
Well, we're talking platforms.
Yeah, but rights are going to be given by a person, given by some object, some entity. So are you saying instead that instead of having the state do it, then would you say that the platforms themselves would be like fighting for it? Because you were talking about liberals fighting for people's rights to say things. When we're talking about rights are given by the state in this country. So who else?
Okay, I'm just going to
Can she answer first?
here. So,
Well,
I know where this conversation is going. Basically, it's the paradox of intolerance. Basically, the concept that we shouldn't let the state enforce it, but we should build cultural attitudes and social groups.
That's not what I'm not doing that. Yeah. What I'm asking is asking her to explain to me what exactly she means should be done in this scenario.
I'm wanting to. I don't think this is a good framework of the conversation. I think the better framework is to ask, how can we as individuals?
That's my question. Look. What you're saying to me right now is, I want to talk about something else. I took the time to ask a question, and you're being rude and basically saying, who cares about your question? Because what I think is better to talk about is X. I don't care what you think is better to talk about. I asked a question that I want an answer to, that she's right here and capable of answering. So please allow her to answer the question, as opposed to thinking you can commandeer the conversation and deny me the question that I asked.
All right.
Okay, so the reason Wordy, do you... Okay.
I'm just saying, the problem with this is I've seen the end of this dialogue tree, and basically...
Okay, that's fair. But, like, Sarah, would you like to respond to Fanatic's
First, I wanted to hear what Katie was saying, because...
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay, so at least here's my issue with why they're not answering type of thing, and I think what Wordy is gesturing at. It's the framing, basically, and the way that it's been made. So how do I explain this?
Can I provide a better framing?
Yes.
Okay. There is no point in engaging the conversation, because at the end of the day, if you ask the state to make these reductions of rights, all it does is end up hurting people of minority status instead of fascists, because at the end of the day, that's how it functions. So what your better options are is saying, how is I as an individual and in my social groups can build places where either people work out different issues and tendencies that they may demonstrate and understand the problems with that, or if somebody's just going to be a bad faith or fascist or whatever, you can just say, hey, fuck off. That is the better situation, because at the end of the day, asking the state to curtail freedom of speech it's a really tricky thing, and that ends up being more authoritarian than you want it to be.
Okay, so first of all, I will say I definitely agree that the paradox of intolerance is not a productive conversation that we would be taking to. Second of all, I want to point out that my response was because that was very specifically not what I said, and you took it as if I had said it anyway. And that's a pretty bad faith way to start a framework for us to have further discussion. So, I'm not interested in going down that route. If I specifically make a qualifier or speak about an issue and I clarify when asked, and that was a good question, Nina, that was a great question. When I qualify that I'm not talking about the state doing it, and then to launch into a thing about the state with very dialogue tree kind of directions. I just don't feel productive, and I don't feel like it's going to help everyone here have a good or interesting conversation. So I'd like to like move past that.
We can absolutely move past it. What I can say is it's paradoxical. It's paradoxical to mention, hey, I'm not talking about the state. We're just talking about rights. When rights are granted by the state, so then you're basically embedding within it a conversation about the states. But if you want to go ahead and go down that tree, I'm checking out. We're good. Go ahead and move on to the conversation to wherever the freak y'all want to take it.